Hey there, viewers. It's one thing to walk on the moon. It's another to come back haunted by what you saw there. Because when Neil Armstrong went live and revealed what he found on the moon, even the silence that followed was terrifying. Let's get into it. Chapter 1. The broadcast no one noticed. I always knew the archives had stories no one wanted told. I just didn't think I'd be the one to find one of them. It was raining outside. Not dramatic thunderstorm rain, just that steady, half-hearted kind that makes the air feel like it's trying to soak into your skin. I was sitting alone in the back wing of the NBC building, hunched over a cart full of old Betacam tapes, most labeled in smudged black marker, some faded to almost nothing. I'd only been at the job 6 months, barely past the intern phase. My name's April. April marked I work in media archival and restoration, though work mostly meant logging tape durations, cataloging air dates, and, if I was lucky, running a few tapes through the digitizer so they could get dumped into the cloud and forgotten forever. That day was just supposed to be another mindless run-through. A box had been pulled from long-term cold storage and dropped in my lap with a yellowing post-it that said, Pre-2000s, unknown air status, process for digital. Nothing exciting, mostly old election coverage, a daytime talk show or two, and several tapes marked as B-roll with time scribbled on the spine. Then I saw it. It was near the bottom of the stack, the label partly peeled, the plastic casing scuffed like it had been shoved in and out of shelves too many times. The tape read in small caps, Live, Armstrong, Studio B, 1994, do not air. Those last 3 words, handwritten in red Sharpie, were underlined twice. I stared at it for a long time before sliding it into the deck. The screen flickered once, then again. A static bar crawled across the image before it stabilized. No intro music, no title card, just the tight frame of a studio set, one of the older interview spaces we don't use anymore, I think. The kind with deep red curtains and soft amber lighting that makes everything feel vaguely haunted. There was a man seated under the lights, slouched, hands clasped, quiet. The makeup girl darted into frame for a second, dabbed at his forehead, and then disappeared like a ghost. It was Neil Armstrong. Even through the grainy image, the face was unmistakable. Older now, white-haired and worn down in that way astronauts always seem to get, like space took more from them than it gave. But it was the eyes that got me. They didn't look at the camera. They didn't look at the interviewer. They just stared off somewhere else, like he was still up there. The interviewer's voice came in, off camera, calm, friendly. Mr. Armstrong, thank you for being here. I understand this is a difficult topic. Armstrong blinked slowly. He looked like he hadn't slept. He opened his mouth to speak, and then he started to cry. Not loud, not sobbing, just a single tear that traced down the left side of his cheek, and a shaky exhale that fogged up the lower part of the lens. I sat up straighter. My hands went still on the keyboard. That wasn't normal. He finally spoke, just barely audible. There are things you keep buried. Things you think won't follow you back. Then the screen twitched, a jagged horizontal tear. The audio glitched, high-pitched interference slicing through the signal like a needle dragged across a vinyl record. The video rolled once, hard, up and down, and then steadied for half a second, just enough for me to catch Armstrong leaning forward, eyes wide like he was about to say something he shouldn't. And then it cut. Hard black screen, just dead air. The time code read 11:07, even though the tape label said 60:0. Nearly 49 minutes missing. I pulled the tape out and stared at it like it might start hissing or catch fire in my hands. My heart was hammering against my ribs, but I couldn't explain why. It's not like I saw anything horrific. No aliens, no flashing lights, no confessions of government conspiracies. But there was something wrong with that footage. The kind of wrong you feel in your stomach, where logic doesn't really matter anymore. I logged it in the system as requested. Digitized, footage corrupted, time code discrepancy noted. Then I went straight to my supervisor's office. His name's Glenn. He's been in broadcast since before I was born, with the ponytail and constant coffee breath to prove it. When I showed him the footage, he barely watched 15 seconds before shaking his head. "Oh, this old thing," he said, waving it off. "Yeah, that was shelved a long time ago. PR got cold feet or something, you know how it is. But it was labeled live, and the content," he looked seriously upset. "And there's a huge cut in the footage." Glenn shrugged. "It happens. Not everything makes it to air, and that's by design. Sometimes legal, sometimes internal. Let it be, April. That one's not ours to worry about." "But there's a red note that says do not air. Why archive something that wasn't aired?" "Because that's what we do," he said. "We archive. We don't investigate." That was the end of the conversation. But it wasn't the end for me. That night, I made a digital copy of the file and dumped it onto a secure thumb drive I kept in my backpack. I know, technically, that's a fireable offense. But there was something about Armstrong's face, that moment of breaking. I needed to know why no one wanted this scene. I stayed late that night, well past when the building locked up and the janitors came through with those noisy floor buffers. I pulled up the file again, tried running some software diagnostics on the footage. The glitch wasn't from the tape deteriorating, at least not entirely. It looked like someone had intentionally edited around a chunk. But why leave the start of the footage intact at all? On a whim, I decided to look up who else was involved in Armstrong's mission. Buzz Aldrin, Michael Collins, the command module team. All still had varying degrees of public presence, but one name stood out: Douglas Fry, a mission audio technician who'd worked on Apollo 11 and later became a NASA contractor for archival systems. I found a number. Old, but still connected to his name. I called. It rang twice, then a click, breathing on the other end, shallow, careful. "Hello?" I said. "Mr. Free? My name's April. I work for NBC Media Archives and..." Silence. I found an old interview with Armstrong from 1994. He said some things, but the tape cuts out. It looks like something was covered up. Still nothing. "Mr. Fry." Then I heard something. Not a voice. Not exactly. More like a faint buzz, like interference crawling through the line. And then, barely above the static, a whisper I couldn't make out. And the line went dead. No beep, no click, just gone. I lowered the phone slowly, suddenly aware of how loud the fluorescent hum of the office had become. My reflection in the dark monitor looked pale, off. I glanced over at the tape again, still sitting on my desk, that old red Sharpie note glaring up at me like a warning. Do not air. But maybe, just maybe, this was the one story someone was supposed to see. Chapter 2. The Real Descent. The hum in my headset was steady, a background lull that I'd learned to live inside over the years. The kind of sound that burrows into your mind until it becomes part of you, like your heartbeat, like breathing. I was focused but not calm. That's something people always got wrong about astronauts. We weren't fearless, we were trained to act like we were. The moon hung beneath us, close enough now that I could see every scar and crater like wrinkles in the face of something impossibly ancient. Even after months of mission prep, simulations, briefings, checklists stacked to the ceiling, nothing prepared you for what it felt like to actually descend toward the surface of another world. You don't think about the history books, the flags, or the headlines. You think about gravity. You think about fuel. You think about survival. "Program alarm," Buzz said, his voice sharp and tight. 12:02. I blinked at the display. Not now. Of all times, not now. The master alarm flashed red. The computer, overtasked by a series of radar instructions, couldn't keep up with its workload. We'd trained for it, technically, but the simulation room was thousands of miles behind us now, and we were running on seconds, not theories. Another code popped up. 1201. I gripped the stick tighter, exhaled slow. "We're go on that alarm," I said, trusting Mission Control's calm voice in my ear. Throttle down. Buzz didn't question me. That was part of the job. Implicit trust, even when the ground beneath you is airless and foreign. I glanced out the window. What I saw pulled something in me tight like a wire snapping in my chest. Just past the planned landing zone, a scattering of gray rock and flat basin, I saw something that didn't belong. At first I thought it was just shadow. The way light hits the lunar surface can trick the eye, but this wasn't light. It wasn't shadow either. It was structure. Something dome-shaped, too perfectly rounded for natural erosion, half buried beneath a sloping ridge near the southern edge of a crater. Its surface glinted faintly, like polished metal dulled by age and dust. There was a subtle symmetry to it, lines etched across its surface, smooth, deliberate, not jagged like broken stone. It didn't move, it didn't shine, but I felt it watching me. I didn't say anything to Mission Control, didn't mention it to Buzz. I nudged the controls gently, adjusting the trajectory. I needed to get us away from that ridge, away from the structure. It wasn't fear. I'd been afraid before. This was something else, an instinct deeper than logic, like walking into a room and knowing someone had just left, like being looked at through a keyhole without knowing where the door is. Buzz kept rattling off data. Altitude, velocity, forward velocity slowing, 756. The site we were targeting was too cluttered. Rocks, boulders, a field of debris like a jaw full of broken teeth, and that thing, whatever it was. I chose a spot nearly 500 meters to the west, just beyond a slight rise, flat, clean, unthreatening. Taking manual control, I said, not waiting for confirmation. The LM responded with a slow glide, each movement careful, precise. Every second counted, every drop of fuel. My pulse should have been racing, but it wasn't. It was low, steady, almost like I'd slipped out of time. Through the small window, the moon rose to meet us, gray and still. No wind, no clouds, just dust, silent and absolute. And underneath it all, that dome. When we finally touched down, the sensation was almost imperceptible, like setting down on glass. Then the call came through from Houston. "You got a bunch of guys about to turn blue. We're breathing again. Thanks." Buzz let out a breath and clapped my shoulder. "Tranquility Base here," I said into the mic, keeping my voice even. "The Eagle has landed." That moment became history. Those words were inscribed in textbooks, replayed in documentaries, carved into plaques. But no one knew what else I saw, what I was really looking at when I said them. Buzz began his post-landing checklist, verifying systems, cross-checking readouts. I let him go through it alone for a moment. My eyes drifted back to the ridge. The dome was still there, partially shadowed now, like it was waiting for something. I reached down and flicked off the external comm switch. My mic was still on, but nothing would transmit to Earth. It would read like a dropout static from the surface, common enough in transmissions back then. I looked out at the edge of that crater and whispered, mostly to myself. "They're already here," I said. My voice barely made it through my own helmet. "They're watching." I didn't know who they were. I still don't. But I knew it the way you know when someone's standing just behind you in a dark room. The feeling was unmistakable. Something about the moon, this stretch of emptiness, wasn't empty at all. Buzz glanced over. "Everything all right?" I flipped the comm back on. "Yeah, just checking antenna positioning." He nodded and went back to his panel. He hadn't seen it. He didn't need to. It wasn't meant for him. That night, or what counted as night inside the LM, we went through the motions, rest cycles, hydration, system prep. I stared at the monitors like they were going to blink and tell me it was all in my head, but every time I shut my eyes, I saw the structure. The way it sat there, half swallowed by the regolith, like a secret that refused to stay buried. And something else, a hum, not in my ears, in my bones. No vibration, no sound, just a pressure, a frequency I couldn't explain, like someone had struck a tuning fork deep beneath the surface and it was resonating through me. Through all of us. I didn't sleep. Buzz snored fitfully. Collins orbited silently above in the command module, unaware. Mission Control checked in every hour or so, calm and precise, proud fathers listening to their boys talk about dust and geology and safe landings. No one asked what we'd seen on approach. No one brought up deviations in our flight path. The telemetry would have shown it. But no questions came. Maybe they already knew. Maybe they didn't want to. I kept quiet, wrote the coordinates down in my own log, unspoken, filed it away in a box of thoughts I never intended to open again. But I know what I saw. It wasn't a hallucination. It wasn't a shadow. It was a structure. It was geometric, artificial, ancient. And it was watching us land. Chapter 3, The Unwalked Zone. The surface of the moon wasn't dead. That was the first lie I unlearned. It looked like it was gray and still, dry as bone, but there was something deeper humming beneath it all, like it was waiting for someone to notice, and that someone, unfortunately, was me. Everything about the extravehicular activity, the EVA, was choreographed down to the minute. NASA didn't like surprises. Our movements were scripted, expected, measured by engineers and physicists and a chain of mission controllers back on Earth. From the moment we stepped down that ladder, we were expected to follow protocol to the letter, scoop samples, plant the flag, read off our checklist like clockwork. And for the most part, we did. Buzz was beside me, half a dozen feet away, hunched over with a scoop in one hand and a white collection bag in the other, muttering readouts to mission control. He was precise, focused, always had been. Everything he did was for the mission, for the record, for the goal. But my eyes weren't on the samples. They were on the ridge. Even in this unnatural gravity, the moon's landscape had a way of pulling your gaze toward it. Craters that stretched like dry oceans, jagged lines in the distance that looked like the aftermath of ancient tectonic shifts. Though we knew the moon had no weather, no plate movement, no erosion, and there, just barely peeking above the crest of the ridge, was the structure. It was still there, still watching. I could see more of it now, the curve of it, not quite a dome, more like the top of a buried orb. Its surface layered in symmetrical paneling like an engineered shell. Dust had accumulated on the edges, softening its outline, but not enough to disguise how artificial it was. It didn't belong here, not with the rocks and dust and debris left behind by meteors over millennia. It was too clean, too deliberate. I told myself I'd leave it alone, that we'd just finish the mission and return, but the moment my boots touched the surface, I felt myself drifting toward it, an unspoken pull, a gravity beyond the moon's. We were outside the LM, about 45 minutes into the walk. I glanced at Buzz. "I'm going to get a few samples from that incline to the west," I said. But he didn't look up. "That's outside the mapped zone, Neil. I'll stay within visual, just want a wider composition range." "Copy that," he said, distracted, voice crackling in my headset. "Don't go too far." I knew he wouldn't stop me. I also knew Mission Control would assume I was improvising for scientific curiosity. Nothing unusual for a guy who'd just become the first man to set foot on the moon. I turned and walked. Each step kicked up tiny clouds of gray regolith that floated lazily before settling again. The incline was steeper than it looked, My suit made movement awkward, but adrenaline dulled the clumsiness. I climbed, slow and steady, until I was just below the ridge, out of view of the cameras and out of Buzz's line of sight. That's when I saw it fully. The structure was at least 10 meters wide, its top forming a smooth half-sphere that curved perfectly into the lunar dust. No jagged edges, no signs of decay. Just age. Ancient age. Its color was hard to place, gray, like everything else here, but with an undertone that shifted slightly under my visor's filter. I walked slowly around its arc, looking for anything, markings, indentations, seams. And I found one. A recess in the surface, near the base, where the dust seemed unusually disturbed, not like it had been blown or kicked up, more like it had been moved aside by something or someone. I crouched down. The recess was shaped like a small trapezoid, maybe 4 inches across, rimmed with something that looked metallic but didn't reflect light the way metal should. The center was slightly concave, like a shallow indentation meant to be pressed. I reached out, my gloved hand trembling slightly. My mind was screaming not to touch it, but my body disobeyed. My fingers brushed the edge of the recess. The hum that erupted beneath my skin wasn't sound. It was a vibration, slow and deep, that ran up my arm and straight into my chest. It wasn't painful, but it wasn't right either. It felt like being tuned, like my body was being calibrated to a frequency I didn't recognize. And then it hit. A flash behind my eyes. Not light, not memory, a vision. For one fraction of a moment, I wasn't on the moon anymore. I saw corridors, long, high-vaulted and black as obsidian, lit from within by no obvious source. I saw symbols etched into walls that pulsed faintly, changing shapes when I tried to focus on them. There was no air, but I didn't feel like I was suffocating. I was floating, weightless, pulled forward by something unseen. Then the sky. A sky not of Earth, not of the moon, but of deep, endless blackness. Not empty, but full of presence. There was something there, moving in it, massive, slow, impossible to define, like a creature made of gravity and thought. I felt it look at me. I heard whispers, not in English, not in any language I'd ever known, but I understood them. You are not ready. My hand jerked back, the vision snapped off like a light bulb shattering. I stumbled backward, gasping, my breath fogged the inside of my helmet. I nearly lost my balance in the low gravity, flailing for footing as the dust swirled around me. The surface had gone completely silent again. No hum, no vibration. But I knew it had happened. I turned back toward the LM, chest heaving, sweat pooling at the base of my neck seal. Buzz's voice crackled in my ear again, distant. "Neil, you copy? You're drifting out of signal range. You okay?" I steadied myself, forcing my voice to stay level. "Yeah, just had to get a better angle. Coming back." I walked back down, slower this time. The landscape no longer looked like a dead world. It looked like a burial ground. Like I was trespassing. Buzz was near the flag now, adjusting its position. He turned as I approached. I must have looked pale, even behind the visor, because he squinted. "You good?" he asked. "Yeah," I said, too fast. "Suit's running a little hot, that's all." He didn't press, just handed me a bag and told me to collect some rock samples from the shadow line. We went through the rest of the EVA like nothing had happened. The cameras followed us, the world watched. We played our roles. But I didn't look back toward the ridge. Not once. Later, during debrief, Buzz mentioned casually that I seemed quiet after the walk. Like you'd seen a ghost, he joked. I laughed it off, said I was just processing the moment. But the truth is, I had seen something. And whatever it was, it saw me too. Chapter 4. Quarantine isn't just protocol. The day they wheeled the 3 astronauts into the lunar receiving laboratory, it didn't feel like a homecoming. It felt like containment. The air was thick with applause and media coverage, and the press couldn't get enough of the smiling heroes behind the glass. But from where I stood, behind 2 layers of reinforced observation windows and buried in telemetry printouts, it felt more like we were locking something in. My name is Dr. Emil Heron, and back then I was part of the Biomedical Monitoring Division, one of the lead flight surgeons assigned to post-mission health analysis. We were told to expect mild muscle atrophy, some immune readjustment, maybe psychological symptoms due to extended confinement and low gravity. What we weren't told to expect was Neil Armstrong's silence. It started subtle. While Buzz and Collins chatted through routine debriefings and shared anecdotes with the tech staff like it was just another job well done, Armstrong sat still. He'd answer questions with the precision expected of a Navy man, but he never added more than he had to. His eyes, sharp and attentive on television, looked hollow now, like he hadn't brought all of himself back from the moon. Inside the mobile quarantine facility, we monitored them around the clock. Heart rate, blood pressure, EEG, body temp, everything streamed into our banks in the lab below. At first, it all looked fine, within tolerances, but on day 3, things shifted. We logged Armstrong's heart rate at 38 beats per minute during sleep, low even, for someone in peak cardiovascular condition. The EEG was stranger. During REM cycles, his brain showed patterns we didn't have templates for. Bursts of high-frequency oscillation that spiked and vanished without any apparent cause. It was like someone had added static to the baseline of his dreams, and wrote up the anomalies and forwarded the findings to Dr. Kepner, our team lead. A couple hours later, I got a curt reply. Flagged for internal review. No further comments required. No further comments required. It was the first time in my career I was told not to investigate a health irregularity, not question it, not follow up, just observe and move on. But I didn't move on. I started watching Armstrong more closely. During waking hours, he would often stare at the far wall of the MQF where the stainless steel reflected just enough of his face for him to look into his own eyes. Sometimes he wouldn't blink for minutes. His pulse would slow to near sleep levels, but his EEG would show full waking alertness. Collins joked once, "Neil, you meditating in there?" Armstrong didn't respond. The real shift happened on night 5. We weren't supposed to disturb the astronauts unless there was a medical emergency, but the audio feed from their quarters was piped in quietly, and I was reviewing patient logs when I heard something. Not words at first. A low murmur, like a man talking to himself in his sleep. I turned up the channel. The voice was Armstrong's. "Not dead," he was whispering. Clear now, slow. Just waiting. Still there. Buried, but not dead. I stood up so fast I knocked over a clipboard. The voice faded, then silence. I marked the time code and reviewed the EEG. It showed a burst again, higher than anything I'd seen on previous nights. It looked almost like a seizure pattern, but without the physical markers. His body had remained still, calm, as if his mind had gone somewhere while his body remained on Earth. The next morning I noticed something else. In the small journal each astronaut was given, part of a post-mission psychological protocol, Armstrong had filled several pages with sketches. That wasn't unusual in itself. Astronauts often doodled or wrote reflections, but these weren't doodles. They were symbols. Shapes I'd never seen before, concentric circles intersected with sharp angles, grid-like patterns overlaid on rough lunar terrain, a series of hash marks I recognized as possible coordinate points, but they didn't match any of the areas logged during their EVA. I cross-referenced them with the moon maps we had on file. One coordinate pair pointed to a stretch of the Sea of Tranquility far outside their documented path near the ridgeline, but on the reverse slope from the LM's landing zone, an area not visible on camera, not officially accessed. I photographed the journal pages, sent them with a full report to the higher-ups. That evening, my access to Armstrong's file was revoked. The day after, my terminal flagged an override message. All future observations of patient Armstrong to be conducted without annotation unless critical to health outcome. The message was signed by someone I didn't recognize. The initials were stamped, not typed. Security clearance above mine, far above mine. I wanted to protest, I nearly did, but something held me back. The next few days blurred together. Armstrong grew quieter, if that was possible. He still followed protocol, still answered questions when prompted, but his replies came slower. He spent more time sitting upright in bed, eyes open but unfocused. Buzz tried to joke with him. Collins did what he always did, deflect, distract, keep spirits up. But Armstrong never smiled. On day 9, I tried to speak with him personally. It was against the chain, but I waited until the room was clear and stepped up to the comm mic. "Neil, it's Dr. Heron. You feeling all right?" He blinked, turned toward the glass. His voice was calm. "You ever feel like you left something behind, doctor?" I didn't know how to answer that. He tilted his head slightly, like a part of you didn't come back. "I imagine that's normal," I said carefully. "Post-mission psychological dislocation, it passes." He nodded slowly. "This won't pass." Then he laid back down and didn't speak again for the rest of the shift. That night he had another episode. I stayed late to observe. At 3:14, his EEG spiked violently. He sat up in bed, eyes closed, then reached for his journal and began drawing again. The pen moved in quick, angular lines, circular patterns with branching limbs, like some kind of fractal tree, and symbols. I watched in silence as he filled 3 more pages. When he finished, he stared at them for nearly 10 minutes before tearing the pages out and folding them into his pillowcase. I recorded everything. When I tried to retrieve the pages the next morning, they were gone. When I asked the assistant technician about it, he shrugged. "Room was cleaned before you arrived, sheets changed, nothing in the linens." I checked the waste bins, nothing. That afternoon, Armstrong was moved to a separate debriefing wing. I wasn't informed of the transfer. Buzz and Collins remained in the MQF until the end of their protocol. I continued their evaluations. Their vitals normalized quickly, their sleep patterns were steady. There were no anomalies in their neurological readouts, no whispers in the night. Just Armstrong. Only Armstrong. I handed in my final reports 2 days later. I marked Armstrong's status as medically stable with ongoing psychological stressors, subject to further evaluation. The day after I filed that report, I was pulled from the mission team and reassigned to a general review committee on Skylab nutrition studies. I didn't fight it. I never spoke to Armstrong again. I saw him once, a year later, at a press event. He stood on stage, said all the right words, answered the usual questions, but I saw it in his eyes. He still wasn't home. Whatever he'd touched up there, whatever had touched him back, it wasn't done with him. And deep down I knew it never would be. Chapter 5, The NASA Archivist's Warning. I waited 3 days before calling the number. I stared at it scribbled on the back of a gas receipt in my notebook like it might vanish if I looked at it too long. I had already copied the Armstrong tape, already made 2 backups. One lived on a USB hidden in my sock drawer, the other, encrypted, was floating on a private server. I didn't know exactly what I was protecting it from, only that I felt like I had crossed a threshold and now something was watching me from the other side. The number belonged to a man named Richard Halloway, according to the last known listing. Retired NASA archivist, if the whispers on the web were true. He had worked directly with mission transcript preservation back in the early Apollo days, with clearance to redacted comms and primary audio backups. Things that weren't released to the public, and in some cases, never even acknowledged to exist. He didn't answer on the first try, or the second. I left a message each time. The third call went straight to voicemail without ringing, and I figured that was it. Another dead lead, another ghost of a name buried in outdated message boards and declassified teases. Then, a week later, I got a text. Not a call, not even from the same number. Meet me at 43 West Hollow. No phones, no questions on voicemail. I was smart enough to know how this sounded. I wasn't a journalist, I wasn't an investigator, and I definitely wasn't trained for cloak and dagger meetings in upstate cabins. But something about that tape, about the missing footage, had wormed its way inside my brain. It wasn't just a curiosity anymore. It was a responsibility. Armstrong had tried to tell the truth once. Someone had cut him off. If there was more to find, I had to see it through. West Hollow was 3 hours outside the city, a forgotten bend of rural roads where the street signs were rusted and half the houses looked like they were held together by paint and habit. The address led me to a wooden structure tucked into the trees, more shack than house. No mailbox, no visible power lines. The yard was a sprawl of dead leaves, metal scraps, and solar panels that looked like they hadn't been cleaned since the Bush administration. But it was so. I left my phone in the glove compartment like the message instructed. My recorder, too. Just brought a notebook and a pencil. Knocked once. The door opened part way. A pale, sunken face stared back at me. Gray beard, cracked glasses, a cigarette with more ash than tobacco hanging from his lip. "April?" he asked, his voice raspy, skeptical. "Yes, I know who you are. Come inside." He didn't introduce himself. He didn't even hold the door open, just turned and walked deeper into the dim interior, leaving me to follow or not. The inside was worse than the outside. Stacks of paper, boxes labeled with red marker, magnetic tape reels, computers so old they still had floppy disk drives. It smelled like mildew and old copper wiring. A generator thrummed softly outside. The walls were covered in maps, some lunar, some Earth, others I didn't recognize. He sat in a creaking office chair and gestured to the wooden stool across from him. "I saw your message," he said, "about the Armstrong tape." I nodded, unsure of how much to say. Most people who find that don't stick with it. They see the glitch, they shrug, they move on. You didn't. "No," I said. Because it didn't feel like a glitch. It felt intentional, like someone sliced the truth out and left just enough to confuse us. He looked at me for a long time, then reached under his desk and pulled out a small metal lockbox, the kind you'd expect to hold old keys or cash. He placed it on the table between us and didn't open it right away. "I archived mission transcripts for 17 years, he said. "Apollo, Skylab, early shuttle programs. We were the ones who took the raw comms, cleaned them, transcribed them, and decided what was suitable for public release." "You mean you redacted them?" I said. He gave a dry, humorless smile. "Call it what you want. Some things weren't meant for headlines." He tapped the top of the box. "Armstrong's 19-second blackout. That's not a glitch. It was manually cut." I figured, I said. "Was it just that interview or?" "No," he said. "The live comms. The moon landing itself. Those 19 seconds were removed before the press got the feeds. What went out to the networks was filtered. Not heavily, just enough." I felt a tightness in my chest. "So what did he say?" He looked at me like he was weighing something, then unlatched the box. Inside, nestled among foam and faded manila folders, was a reel of audio tape, smaller than I expected. He handled it like it was glass. "This is a duplicate," he said. "The original's gone. Maybe destroyed, maybe buried somewhere deeper than even I can imagine. But I kept a copy. Don't ask how." He set the tape down and slid one of the folders toward me. It was labeled Tranquility Comms, Restricted, A11, RF. 72. I opened it. Inside was a typed transcript. Not a full conversation, just a segment. The time code matched the missing portion. I read it aloud, softly, feeling the weight of every word. There, lined up on the far crater wall, watching us. Buzz, confused, replied, "What?" "They're not moving, just standing there." Then there was a long pause, no noise. Then Armstrong again. "Don't come closer, stay where you are, we won't interfere." Another pause, then static. I looked up, the paper trembling slightly in my hands. "Jesus," I whispered. He leaned back, eyes heavy. The whole feed went dead for a second after that. Then we were told to cut it, patch a clean segment over it and flag it for internal use only. I tried to breathe normally, but my pulse was thudding in my ears. Well, why didn't anyone do anything, say something? This was a global event. He looked away, lit another cigarette. The first one had burned itself out untouched. "Because Neil made a choice," he said. He agreed to stay quiet. Whatever he saw, whatever saw him, he knew it would never be believed. And maybe more than that, he was told not to speak. By who, I can't say. NASA? Someone above them? I don't know. But he stopped talking, until that interview you found. "So why come forward now?" I asked. "Why tell me?" "Because the truth has a half-life," he said. "Eventually, someone always finds it. I've kept this for decades. Figured I'd take it to my grave, but if someone like you is digging, someone outside the system, then maybe it's time." I stared at the transcript again. The idea that the moon wasn't empty, that they saw something, that Armstrong spoke to it. Or them. "Did he ever say anything else?" I asked quietly. "After the mission?" He nodded. "In a private memo, long after the debriefs, unofficial, I only saw it once and it was destroyed soon after," he wrote. "The silence wasn't hollow, it was full. That was it." I copied the transcript by hand while he watched. When I finished, he slid the folder back into his box and locked it. "You should go," he said. "I've said too much already." I hesitated. "What if people find out?" "They won't believe it," he said. "They never do." When I left the cabin, dusk had already swallowed the trees. The generator's hum faded behind me as I walked to my car. The woods felt still. Too still. I didn't look back. Chapter 6. The Live Interview. I had only one condition before agreeing to the interview. No audience, no teleprompters, no producers whispering in the background. I didn't want the makeup crew hovering around me or some director telling me to smile more or hit my marks. If I was going to talk, really talk, it had to be in silence. Just me and the camera. That was the only way I could say what I'd kept buried for 25 years. The man from the network, Harris or something, was polite enough. He asked all the right questions during the prep call, played the part of the respectful journalist, but I could hear it in his voice. He thought I was just another old astronaut making the rounds, nostalgic for glory days. He didn't know what I was really there to say. No one did. The studio was cold, not freezing, just enough to make my joints ache in a way they never used to. They put me in a plain chair beneath warm lighting, set against a maroon curtain that looked like it hadn't been changed since the 70s. There was no set dressing, no flag, no lunar backdrop, just shadows softly framing my profile. They mic'd me up, adjusted the boom arm, ran a sound check. I kept my gaze down the whole time, watching the cord on my lap, coiling and uncoiling around my fingers like a serpent made of rubber and wire. My heartbeat was steady, but there was something fluttering under my ribs. Not fear, exactly, closer to a reckoning, like something that had waited a long time for me to return. I'd rehearsed what I was going to say, not the exact words, just the rhythm of it. The moments I'd finally let the memories breathe. The memories they told me to bury. The interviewer sat across from me, just out of frame. His name was Carter, I think. Young, sharp suit, the kind of smile that made people trust him. He kept his voice low and gentle, the way handlers talk to skittish dogs. "We're just going to have a conversation," he said. "If anything feels uncomfortable, we'll stop. You're in control." I nodded once. The floor manager counted us in. Rolling in 5, 4. I stared into the lens. The red light blinked on. "We're here with Neil Armstrong," Carter began, "the first human to walk on the moon. Mr. Armstrong, thank you for being with us today." I kept my voice flat. "Of course. I'd like to start with something simple," he said. "After all these years, what stayed with you the most? The silence? The achievement? The Earthrise, maybe?" I didn't answer right away. My hands clenched around the arms of the chair. The lights felt hotter. The studio, smaller. He tried again. "What was the biggest surprise, if you had to name one, about being on the moon?" I swallowed once, looked past him, not at him, past. "It wasn't just lifeless," I said. "It felt aware." Carter blinked, his practiced smile faltering just slightly. "Aware?" I nodded slowly. "There's a difference between empty and quiet. The moon isn't empty, it's listening." He leaned in, sensing something different now. Not a standard interview, something raw beneath the surface. "Can you tell us more about that?" I breathed in, held it, released. "There was something there," I said. "We didn't land where we were supposed to. The computer errors, those weren't random. I saw something, near a crater wall, something geometrical, too perfect." Carter said nothing, letting me go on. I walked beyond camera range, said I was collecting samples. That was a lie. I went to see it, the dome, half buried, like it had sunk into the regolith, or been there long enough for the dust to claim it. My voice had taken on a rhythm now. I wasn't thinking anymore. I was remembering. "There was an indentation," I said. "Like a hatch." I touched it. That was when I felt the room shift. Not literally nothing moved, but something in the air changed, thicker, charged. I thought at first it was just the old trauma creeping back in, but I knew that sensation. This was different. I kept talking. "There was a vibration," I said. "It went through my glove, through my hand, into my chest, and then I wasn't on the moon anymore. Not really." Carter's eyes widened, just a little. He didn't interrupt. I saw corridors, black stone, symbols I couldn't understand, but I felt them. They weren't written language. They were impressions, a message. I hesitated. He prompted me gently, and what was the message? "It wasn't communication," I said. "It was a warning and a question." Another shift. This time, the studio lights flickered, once, then again. Subtle but undeniable. I glanced up. "Did you see that?" Carter looked around. "Probably just a bad ballast. We'll fix it in post." I tried to keep going. The vision ended with a sky, a black sky, something moving in it, something vast. Watching me. It wasn't angry, just aware, patient. The lights flickered again. Then a sharp, high-pitched sound pierced the air, like a feedback loop, but thinner, more metallic. I winced, clutching my temple. Carter turned to the booth. "What the hell was that?" No one answered. The sound cut out as suddenly as it started. The air was cold now, not from the AC, from something else. I could see my breath even under the hot studio lights. I looked back into the camera. "I can't go on," I said quietly. "They'll stop this." Carter leaned forward, confused. "Who will?" The camera image flickered, scrambled for a moment. The red recording light dimmed, then surged. I could feel the pressure in my skull again. like something was pressing against the inside of my mind, searching for where the thoughts came from. Not reading, more like, "They know when I talk," I said. "I've kept quiet for decades, but I thought maybe they were done watching." The humming started in my ears again, faint but rising. I knew what it meant, the same sound from the ridge, from the dream. "They're not done," I said. "They're still there, beneath it, waiting." The silence. It's not hollow. It's full. I looked down. Then everything cut out. The camera froze on my face, caught mid-syllable. The image fractured into blocks. The audio hissed and snapped. The red light went black. I stood up. Carter shouted something, but I didn't hear him. I was already backing away from the chair, feeling the weight in the air press closer. I knew they were listening again. Not from above, from below. The producers stormed in, scrambling to reboot the equipment. One of them checked the breakers. Another yelled into a headset. The feed was dead, not glitched, not interrupted, gone. The interview was never rescheduled. I received a call 3 days later from a number with no ID, a woman's voice, flat, calm. "Thank you, Mr. Armstrong," she said, "but that's enough." Then she hung up. The tape was shelved, locked away, labeled "Do Not Air." But I knew it wouldn't stay buried forever. Chapter 7. What We Left Behind. I didn't expect him to answer my message. I wasn't even sure the address I found was still good. A handful of university directories, a few scattered mentions in public records. Rick Armstrong had managed to stay just far enough below the radar to seem untraceable unless you really looked. But when I sent him a letter, an actual physical envelope, no email, no attachments, he responded within a week. The letter was short, handwritten, just a single sentence. "Come to Dayton. I'll show you what he left behind." There was no greeting, no signature, but I knew exactly who it was from. 2 flights and 1 rental car later, I found myself driving through a gray Ohio morning, wipers dragging across a windshield smeared with salt and drizzle. The Armstrong house sat at the edge of a residential street lined with maple trees that had already shed their leaves for the winter. It wasn't grand. Just a simple 2-story with pale siding and a front porch that creaked when I stepped onto it. Rick answered the door like he'd been standing on the other side, waiting. He looked nothing like his father. Broader shoulders, unkempt gray hair, dark eyes set deep behind wire-rimmed glasses. He nodded once and stepped aside without a word. Inside, the house was quiet, not empty, just quiet. There was a kind of stillness that felt deliberate, like everything had been arranged to keep the world at a distance. Bookshelves lined the walls, filled mostly with aviation manuals, history texts, and old science fiction paperbacks worn to fuzzed edges. A framed photo of Neil in his flight suit sat on the mantel above the fireplace, the iconic half-smile frozen in time. Rick led me into the den, gestured toward a leather armchair across from a low coffee table, and disappeared down the hall. When he returned, he was holding a small wooden box about the size of a toaster oven, the kind with brass hinges and a tarnished latch that didn't quite close right anymore. He set it on the table and sat down across from me. "You found something," he said. "Didn't you?" I didn't ask how he knew. I just reached into my bag and pulled out the USB drive, slid it across the table. He stared at it for a long time, then nodded once, just barely. He said one day someone would come. Not the government, not the press, just someone who wanted to know. I didn't speak, just waited. He picked up the box and flipped the latch. The inside was lined with soft, aged felt, stained at the corners and worn thin in the center, where something had clearly rested for years. Carefully, reverently, he removed 3 items. The first was a tape, a thick, black VHS cartridge with a peeling label that simply read Studio B, 1994, Original. I didn't need to ask. I knew it was the unedited interview. The second was a leather-bound notebook, its pages stuffed with loose sheets, napkin sketches, and yellowed receipts scribbled with coordinates and numbers. He opened it to the center and showed me. The drawings were more detailed than I expected. They weren't just symbols or rough ideas. These were architectural renderings, angled walls, circular chambers, columns arranged in radial symmetry like the spokes of a wheel. Some pages included what looked like measurements. Others were overlaid on crude lunar maps with red pencil lines drawn in looping arcs around unnamed craters. He'd sketch these for hours, Rick said, his voice quiet. Some nights, he'd sit on the back porch and stare up at the moon without moving. I thought he was just reminiscing, but he wasn't. He was waiting. For what? I asked. Rick closed the book gently. For them to come back, or for us to. He reached into the box again and pulled out the final item, a sealed envelope, heavy paper, worn at the edges. My name wasn't on it, and neither was his, just 2 words written in bold black ink. Read this last. He opened it without hesitation and unfolded the letter inside. I watched his eyes move across the page, slowly at first, then again more quickly. By the time he reached the end, his mouth was pressed into a flat line. He handed it to me. Don't ever let them go back there. Not until they're ready. Not until they know what it really means to be seen. N. I didn't realize I was holding my breath until I read it twice and felt my lungs ache. What did he mean by that? I whispered. Rick leaned back in his chair. He believed the moon wasn't just a destination, it was a mirror, and once you're seen by whatever's out there, you're changed. I looked back at the tape, the notebook, the letter. All these years, I said, NASA's never sent another manned mission to the moon. They've done flybys, probes, talked about Mars, but never back there, not for real. Why? Rick didn't answer right away. When he did, it came in a whisper. Because they saw the report. He opened a drawer in the side table next to him and pulled out a thin manila folder. Inside was a photocopy of a declassified memo, dated October 1969. The top was blacked out, so was most of the middle, but the line near the bottom was intact. Based on flight crew observations and unverified anomalies, recommend indefinite postponement of further lunar EVA exploration until psychological and electromagnetic data can be reconciled. There was no signature. They knew, I said. They knew and buried it. Rick nodded. And Dad? He helped bury it. He agreed to stay quiet. But it tore at him. I thought of the broadcast, of his face as he sat under the lights, the moment his voice cracked, the flicker in the feed, the silence that followed. He tried to tell the truth, I said. And they stopped him, Rick replied. But now you've seen it, and you can't unsee it. We sat in silence for a long while. Eventually I stood. Rick didn't offer to shake my hand. He just looked at me. The way you look at a person stepping into a storm they can't outrun. As I turned to leave, he said one last thing. Be careful. Knowing isn't the hard part. It's what the knowing changes in. The sky outside had turned gray bowl by the time I stepped onto the porch. The moon wasn't visible yet, but I looked for it anyway. And for the first time, I didn't just see a rock. I saw something waiting. Chapter 8. We're not supposed to know. It appeared online at 3:47 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, buried in the far corner of an obscure file-sharing forum with no tags, no comments. No one knew where it had come from. No one traced its source. By the time moderators noticed the upload, thousands had already downloaded it, mirrored it, seeded it. An old man's face under dim studio lights, eyes glassy, hands folded tightly in his lap. A voice like someone cracking open a wound. A voice that said, it wasn't just lifeless, it felt aware. And then the static, the flicker, the moment everything stopped, the moment the air itself seemed to recoil. Within 12 hours, the video had circled the globe, Reddit threads filled with frame-by-frame analyses, theories sprouting like weeds. Subreddits that once debated moon landing conspiracies now burned with a different kind of fervor, not whether we went, but what we found when we did. YouTube channels translated the transcript into half a dozen languages. Discord servers buzzed with users arguing about electromagnetic anomalies, lunar orbit decay, archival suppression. Some dismissed it immediately. Deepfake, they said. Another AI hallucination built to stir drama. But others saw the truth etched in Armstrong's eyes, in the falter of his voice, in the silence that followed. The tape was too raw to be faked, too mundane in its grain, too ordinary in its flaws. You can forge fidelity, you can fake clarity, but you can't fake the feeling of a man finally saying something he's been punished for carrying. By the end of the week, the major networks began issuing expert breakdowns. Video forensics analysts were wheeled out to nod solemnly and suggest the possibility of creative editing, suggest that perhaps Armstrong was discussing psychological effects, not literal phenomena. NASA issued a single press release, barely 2 paragraphs long, reiterating their commitment to transparency, science, and the honor of Commander Armstrong's legacy. They acknowledged the 1994 interview had taken place, yes, but dismissed the leaked footage as incomplete and taken out of context. They did not confirm its contents, they did not mention the blackout. And they never once addressed the missing 19 seconds. Behind the curtain, however, things shifted. A retired mission technician from the Apollo program posted anonymously on a defunct aerospace forum, claiming he'd heard Armstrong say something similar off mic during training simulations. Within 48 hours, the forum was taken offline for security auditing. A former communications analyst from Houston appeared on a live stream interview in Sweden, eyes bloodshot, hands trembling, claiming that entire sections of Apollo 11 telemetry had been altered after the fact. He died 3 days later, cardiac arrest, no autopsy released. Others simply disappeared, not in the dramatic dragged from their homes in the night sense, no, this was quieter. Emails stopped being answered, landlines disconnected, LinkedIn pages deleted. Their names became echoes, quickly swallowed by the noise of the internet. But some things couldn't be silenced. In observatories across the world, researchers began noting anomalies, minor at first. A dip in satellite telemetry, a subtle, rhythmic pulse picked up on deep space antennas. Not interference, not a signal from Earth. Something else. Something coming from the moon. The pulse was geometric. That was how one engineer described it, though it made no sense. It's not Morse, not binary, it's spatial, she said during a leaked internal briefing. It's not communicating, it's resonating. The hum began as subaudible vibration. Most humans couldn't hear it, but it showed up in the recordings. The same frequency Armstrong had described in his sleep. The same resonance the medical logs from the quarantine facility had dismissed as equipment artifact. The moon was humming, slowly, quietly, patiently. And then the light came. It wasn't visible to the naked eye, not at first, but infrared satellites, scanning for temperature differentials across the lunar surface, began to pick up a glow. Beneath the sea of tranquility, beneath the ridge near the southern crater wall, just west of where Apollo 11 had landed. The light pulsed once every 6 hours. Her heart beat. No explanation followed. The world spun on, of course. Politicians pivoted, markets stumbled and recovered, wars flared and faded, but the hum was always there now. In the background, in the systems, deep in the hardware of Earth's satellites, embedded in the analytics of deep space tracking stations, an invisible frequency, echoing beneath the digital noise, just low enough to be ignored, just loud enough to be remembered. The moon had changed, or maybe it had always been like this. Maybe it had only ever been pretending to sleep, waiting for the moment when someone got too close, when someone touched the door. In a control room in New Mexico, a group of technicians reviewed newly captured LRO imagery. On the edge of a familiar crater, unnamed on most maps, they found a surface pattern not there before. A configuration of straight lines just under the dust, forming a perfect octagon. At the center, a circle, half a meter wide, glowing faintly in thermal contrast. No explanation was offered. No missions were proposed. Artemis was quietly delayed. Budgets were reallocated. The focus shifted back to Mars. Safer that way. Easier to pretend the moon had given us all it could. But the dream was changing. You could see it in the artists, in the writers, in the quiet panic behind the eyes of anyone who worked in space agencies and had seen the data that wasn't meant to be public. Something had stirred in our collective unconscious, a shadow passing behind the moon's familiar face. We had been warned, he had tried to tell us. And still, we hadn't listened. Now, in the silence of Earth's night, when the moon hung highest and the sky was clear, amateur radio operators began to pick up something else. Faint modulation embedded in solar reflections, like a whisper tangled in static. And the moon never blinked. It watched. It remembered. It waited. Beneath the regolith, deep in the black stone vaults hidden for millions of years, the pulse continued, growing stronger, slower, measured, like breath being drawn into lungs that hadn't expanded since before humanity scraped its name into stone. In a forgotten corner of the internet, someone uploaded a cleaned version of Armstrong's tape, audio enhanced, color corrected, slowed for clarity. His final words before the feed cut were clearer now. "They're not angry, just waiting, just watching, to see if we learn." The screen flickered to black. No credits, no watermark. Just a single frame, held for 10 seconds before the file ended. A still image of the moon. And at its center, where the shadows deepened and ancient dust had settled, a faint glow, perfectly circular, perfectly still. A heartbeat, a hum, and beneath it a caption. He warned us, we didn't listen, and now, it's awake.